I'm Mary Glen,
And I'm Shama.
and we are your fashion police for today. We're going to be talking about fashion in Scotland and India today.
Yeah.
So a little bit about me. I'm Mary Glen. I am a senior this year at UNC Chapel Hill. I studied abroad in Edinburgh, which is in Scotland, last spring. And my favorite fashion accessory is a good sweater.
Ooh, I think I'm the one before yours. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm Shama. I'm the class of 2021, so I'll be graduating college in 2 years. My family is from India, so I've been there a total of about 5 times in my life, anywhere between 4 and 8 weeks. So I've been there for a total in my life of 8 to 12 months, and my favorite fashion piece is flannels. There we go.
So we want you guys to start off by turning to a partner and discussing what you think clothing might be like in Scotland and India. So you could talk about maybe what patterns you might see, or what kinds of clothes might be in common with clothes that you wear here. So just turn to a partner and discuss for maybe 2 minutes about clothing in the countries in Scotland and India.
Give them a thumbs up when they're done, maybe.
Yeah, so just give us a thumbs up when you guys are done discussing what you think. You're good? Okay. There we go. Okay, so by the end of this presentation, we're hoping that you can identify key features of the clothing from the different countries, so the clothing from India and Scotland.
And also, we're going to have you guys explain some of the culturally and historically significant factors that have impacted different fashion trends in other cultures.
And finally, the last thing that we want you to do is to be able to compare the clothing in American culture that we see here and the clothing in the other cultures that we're going to show you today. Let's do, okay. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is traditional clothing in India. So there are a lot of different types of traditional clothing, and we'll only focus on a few for men and for women. So for women, we have the sari, which is typically worn by older women. It's this long garment. We'll see a picture of it in the next slide that's wrapped around the body. It's typically a top and a skirt. And then we have the salwar kameez, which is really popular nowadays if people wear traditional clothing. It's a loose top that goes down to the knees with pants that are loose towards your thighs but fitted through the ankles. And for men, there's the kurta, which is like the male version essentially of a salwar kameez, which is long and loose fitting. It's a straight shirt and it's worn in different styles with different types of pants. And so we can see here, on the left, we have the bride wearing her sari, very traditional. In the middle, we have the salwar kameez, so we see the long top to the knees and the pants. And then on the right side, we see the kurta, so that's more like fancy type of dress. The kurta can be simple or it can be like really embellished like you see in the picture. So that's probably something that he would wear to like a wedding.
And for Scotland, I'm going to focus on the kilt, which is really widely known in Scotland, and it's actually known as the national dress of Scotland. So the word kilt is actually derived from a Nordic word that means pleated, and it's a long piece of wool fabric that's usually features a distinct tartan or plaid pattern, and it's worn around the waist and wrapped around the body. So the older original kilts actually were worn more like Roman togas. So they're kind of wrapped around the waist and then worn over the shoulder. And so the trend originated in the 16th century Highlands of Scotland, where male Highlanders who were fighting wore full-length garments that were almost this cloak-like garment gathered around the waist and then draped over their shoulders. And the fabric was prized for its versatility. So the excess fabric that's draped over the shoulder could be put over your head as like a cover for sun or rain protection, and it could also be used as a pillow or a blanket if they were sleeping or camping outside. And then aside from the kilt and tartan fabrics, Scotland is also internationally known for its cashmere production and Harris tweed, which is a fabric that's woven only in the outer islands of Scotland, and it's actually protected by its own act of parliament. So it's a very special fabric in Scotland.
So now we're going to switch to more modern clothing now that we've talked about the traditional clothing. So modern clothing in India is very, very similar to what we see in American clothing. So people typically don't wear shorts despite the heat. It's very, very warm there. There are, of course, areas that are cold, but people typically wear long pants, and if they're shorts, they're typically not above the knee for women or men. You see a lot of Western influences, so influences from England, influences from America in the clothing, especially in like the really upper city lifestyles. And it's kind of a mix between the traditional and the modern. So you'll see like a kurta with jeans or a salwar kameez with leggings. You'll see a lot of mix between the traditional Indian and what we consider as American style clothing. So from a historical standpoint, a lot of the changes in Indian dress are associated with British colonization. So India used to be a colony of England, and whenever that happened, seeing what the ruling country wore and associating that with their country is a lot of what brought about this mix between the types. And from a more social standpoint, there's a lot of influence with connection throughout the world. So as time has passed, the world is more connected. We have planes. We can get to other countries way more quickly than we have before. We've got the internet. So more communication led to an adoption of Western styles of clothing. And culturally, Bollywood is a really big influence on fashion in India. So the adoption of Western styles in popular Bollywood films is what influences Western styles in the country itself.
So the kilt has actually gone through a lot of modernization throughout history. It's actually become shorter throughout the years. So it's not a full-length garment anymore like you might see in the Highlands, in the 16th century Highlands. It's actually tailored above the knee today. And the formal style of the kilt has also evolved over the years to incorporate different elements. So now we have like a waistcoat and a small purse that's called a sporon that people usually wear for formal events. And the process of globalization has also changed the way that people are recognizing the kilt as an acceptable form of dress to wear out at parties or casual wear or even like everyday attire for some people. So the 1970s British punk movement was actually a really big push for this, the modernization of the kilt. So it's actually changed a lot in how people recognize tartan patterns and incorporate them into different styles. So now you can see tartan patterns that were originally used in kilts, now used in jackets or fitted pants or hats or purses and all this kind of stuff. And while the kilt itself has gotten revamped into different styles, it's modernizing and breaking out of those historically associated roles that it was typically in the Highlands. So the charm of both cashmere and tartan and tweed is also changing. So in these pictures, you can see some different elements of tartan patterns that are being used. And in the next photos, you can see kind of how the kilt has evolved. So up in the photo on the left, there's different kilts that are camouflage, denim, leather. And then on the right, you'll see that's a runway shot from a 2013 fashion line. And that's a lot of tweed and tartan patterns coming together. And then in the bottom, there's a picture of the Harris tweed fabric that I mentioned earlier, which is being incorporated into lots of purses and jackets and stuff.
So now we're going to talk about occasions. So in India, there is pretty much a different style for every occasion. So we're going to talk about a few of them. So for weddings, you see the traditional red sari, which is the most universally recognized fashion piece from India. It's usually highly embellished. Sometimes it features green, red. You can see the flowers in her hair. Jewelry is really important. So whenever someone is getting married, they typically get whole new sets of jewelry, all gold for the most part. And it's very elaborate, there's contrast between simple and elaborate in India, but this is one of the times where people really go all out, obviously, for their wedding. So one really big difference also, besides the red at weddings instead of white, is that in India we wear white at funerals. And typically it's very simple. It's just a plain like cotton salwar kameez or kurta, plain white pants. And I'll explain some of the colors in a later slide. But the idea is that white is a pure color, so this person is passing on, and it's something that's pure, and it's sad, but it's also a moving on. So for Holi, there's no particular dress. You'll see people wearing all kinds of things, but a lot of the time, especially in the past, people would typically wear white. So Holi is the festival of colors, so you see all of the color that comes with the festival getting onto your white clothing. So it's kind of a symbolism for the whole festival itself. And then for Diwali, which is a festival that just passed, it's kind of like the Indian New Year's. Usually, like as a tradition, women wear sophisticated variations on the salwar kameez or simplified versions of saris, which are called churidars. And a lot of the time, churidars are also worn by younger girls who maybe aren't old enough yet to wear a sari quite yet because they can't wrap the garment around their bodies the same way. So we can see pictures here. So in the top left, we see something that would traditionally be worn to a funeral. So very simple white. It's called an odni. It's the shawl. And then the little boy, of course, he's wearing a little bit of color, but a lot of the time you can get away with color, but the idea is to wear mainly white. So we see in the bottom picture, a picture of Holi. So you see people wearing red, people wearing all kinds of colors. But if you notice in the middle, there's the person with the kind of funky colored afro that's wearing white. That's pretty common. You can see like the colors staining his shirt, and it's just a really big symbol of how color is coming into their lives. On the right side, we see the more elaborate version of the salwar kameez that I talked about. So she's wearing light blue, the top is embellished, the sleeves are mesh with like the embellished cuffs. So that's pretty common for festivals like Diwali.
And then during the 19th century, Scottish kilts were typically a form of ceremonial dress, worn mainly for weddings, special sporting events, and holiday celebrations. And we see that still today. So the kilt is still typically worn for special occasions. So the Highland Games is a big event where a lot of athletes and spectators will wear their traditional kilts, and ceilidhs as well. So ceilidhs are traditional Scottish dances, and both the dancers and the band will wear traditional Scottish kilts. And then also at weddings, the wedding party and typically the groom's side of the family will wear kilts to represent their family clan. And typically at weddings, the bride will wear just a traditional or contemporary white gown, and the groom will wear his traditional Highland kilt, his kilt jacket, and his sporran, which is a purse that goes with kilts. And the Scottish kilt has also become a required uniform for many athletic teams in Scotland, including Scotland's Tartan Army soccer team. So it's really prevalent throughout the country as kind of like this icon of a clothing piece. And here's some images that you can see of people wearing these kilts. So on the left, we have a full formal attire with the kilt. So you can see that he's wearing a kilt jacket, a waistcoat, and the kind of funky looking purse on his waist. That's the sporran that I mentioned before. And then you can see that the kilt is just hanging right above his knees. So traditionally, if we're talking about back in the 16th century, that kilt would have been down to his ankles. It would have been very long. So now they've modernized and they're just at the knees today. And in the upper picture is a group of people at the Highland Games. So they compete in traditional Scottish sporting events, and they're wearing a full traditional garb with a kilt, a sporran, and different elements there that you can see. And the bottom right is a picture from a ceilidh, which is a Scottish dance party, essentially. And the band and then some of the spectators are also wearing kilts and different elements with tartan in them.
So, like I said earlier, we're going to move on to the significance of clothing in Indian culture, particularly the significance of the colors and more of like the embellishments. So, red is often worn at weddings to symbolize fertility. So, like the idea is that these two people love each other, they're getting married, and they want to start a family. So, red is the color of fertility, meaning like good luck in starting their family. You'll also often see green more. Green is another symbol of fertility that's probably more common to us. So like green as a symbol of like fertility in nature. And then white, like I mentioned earlier at funerals, is worn for purity. So these people are passing on, and it's this idea that death is a pure process and it's something that you're moving on from. And then bangles, I love this story about bangles. So bangles are a symbol of love. Women typically wear bangles, but the more elaborate versions, like you see in the picture on the right, are worn. So they're typically worn in a pattern. So you see she has one bangle that's like kind of elaborate, and then a bunch of blue bangles that are framed by the golden ones, or I guess they're silver, and then a statement piece, and then a repeating pattern on the opposite side. So bangles are always worn. They're mixed and matched constantly, and they're always worn in this pattern. So another symbol for bangles is that they're a symbol of love. So a lot of the times brides will wear glass bangles for their wedding, and the idea is that the honeymoon ends whenever the last glass bangle breaks. And then there's the bindi, which I feel like we're all pretty common with, but it's to symbolize marital status. So there's a difference between the colors in bindis. So red versus black is married versus unmarried. They're largely ornamental now. A lot of them come in different colors and they used to be just simple circles, but now they'll come in small patterns that you just put on your forehead right between your eyebrows. And they'll come in different colors. Women often will match them to whatever clothes they're wearing. And then there's henna. So henna is also another thing that's love and marriage. Henna is typically worn for weddings. So there's this story that the darker the color of your henna, once you take it off, the more that your future husband is going to love you. So that's kind of like the fun wedding tradition.
All right, this slide. So back in 1746, the definition of a kilt really changed when King George, who was King of England at the time, imposed the Dress Act, which suppressed Highlanders' ability to wear a kilt. So he actually made it illegal to wear kilts in the Highlands. But despite this, people still wore kilts as a symbol of protest against the British government. And so in 1782, the Dress Act was abolished. And since then, the kilt has stood as an international symbol of Scottish patriotism and pride for their country. So that still resonates today. So a lot of the references to kilts, and like when you see people wearing kilts, it's associated with having a very strong Scottish pride and Scottish identity. And the tartan patterns are also very significant themselves. So they represent different clans, families, regions, or counties in Scotland. And today there's over 8,000 known tartan patterns. And just a side note, making a kilt in a tartan pattern is extremely difficult to do. A lot of it is done by hand. And the actual pattern, as a symbol of the unity and strength of the clan, the region, and the county in Scotland, the tartan pattern is actually unbroken throughout the entire fabric. So it takes around 20 to 25 hours to make kilts because they're so complex and because this pattern has to remain unbroken, and they're nearly all done by hand still today. So it's a very significant fabric, has a lot of history, and yeah, it's very prevalent still today in Scotland. So we're going to wrap up now with a little discussion activity. So we've posed 2 questions. You can talk about one with your partner. So our first one says, turn to a partner and discuss what types of clothing that we've discussed that people wear in Scotland, and maybe related to a specific holiday. So what themes did we talk about that people wore specific dresses for? So you can choose any holiday we've mentioned and just discuss that with a partner.
Or you can discuss a clothing item that has meaning to your culture. There's another word. So like
to your culture.
Yeah, so a meaning to you or your culture, and explain its significance. And whatever ideas you come up with, you guys can drop those in the chat and we'll discuss them with you. If you have any questions, let us know.
And then you can just give us a thumbs up when you're done discussing with your partners or with your class.